One. Hey, and we are live. Hey, Kim.
Hi, how's it going? Super
Pretty good.
excited.
Super excited. Okay, it is episode 5 of the breathing space. Man, we can't believe it.
I know.
Woo!
We were just talking about that before we came on.
Yay, it's been a whole month. We've had so much fun over this month, and we can't wait to dive into today's conversation. So today we're going to talk about getting comfy with experimenting, which is one of the core things that we do in our Life Design Lab program. So we're going to be talking about experimenting. We're going to be sharing the big shifts that it's created for us and the women that we work with and the kind of mindset change that we need to get into this idea of experimenting. But before we do that, let's introduce ourselves. I'm Morna and this is Kim Standeven, and we are the founders of the Life Design Lab for Women Leaders. And this is our weekly show called The Breathing Space, where we really take just 20 minutes to tune in and connect to whatever feels important to talk about. So before we get into the conversation, let's just take a moment to arrive. Take a breath. And wherever you are watching around the world, whether you are watching us live, whether you watch this broadcast some other time, just give yourself the gift of arriving into the space and being with us for the next 15, 20 minutes. Okay. So what is our powerful question today, Kim? I have to look it up. The question that we have is why invest time in experimenting? And we were having a conversation. So how this works is that each week Kim and I meet, we talk about the show. I posted a little photograph onto the page a few moments ago showing the behind the scenes. We get together, we talk about the topic, and sometimes I feel like it's the show before the show, because we kind of end up having the show with each other and then we get into the show. And so we started talking about this idea of experimenting. And what I shared and how I'd like to kick off this conversation is that developing a mindset around experimenting has created dramatic shifts for me as a human being. And like some of you know, Kim and I have been swimming in the waters of personal development and leadership growth for, longer than I and, we've seen a lot of shifts actually in the evolution of personal development. Although I will say one thing seems to stay constant, and it's this idea that we can kind of Google the how-to, or we can just get the magic 6 steps that are going to transform our life, or the, XYZ that worked for this other person. And actually in our experience, it doesn't really work that way. What might work for you isn't going to work for someone else. And actually there might be a lot of trial and error and failure along the way. What do you think, Kim, as we lead into this conversation around experimenting?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of, I don't want to say false expectations, but maybe this expectation that, if you do a 6-step process, that you're not going to go into any low points in your life. And I think we forget that, we're in a constant ocean of changing waters, and the experimenting is really about picking and choosing what's going to be in your main toolbox. But you won't know what's going to go into the toolbox unless you try it out. And sometimes it's trying out the same tool at a different point in your life because you weren't ready for it. So there's just so much change and learning that goes along with this idea of personal development. And I think we spend a lot of time beating ourselves up that, oh, this person, I think, what did you say? We compare ourselves to the external of other people. So
totally. And I know for myself, when I don't have many of these books anymore because I kind of got rid of them in my last book cull. I used to have a lot of books that were really focused around this idea of 6 steps to blah, blah, blah. And, I don't want to dismiss the idea that it's great to go through these processes. But I think the challenge is around relaxing into this idea of trying something on for size. Like, like when you go shopping. You go shopping for a new coat, and you don't just walk into the store and, well, I don't anyway, and maybe some people do, walk into the store, grab the first coat, looks like a good coat, and that's your coat. It might not fit right. It might, squeeze in under your shoulders. And if that happens, do you say to yourself, well, I'm a failure. This coat doesn't fit me right.
I love that.
I don't even know how to wear a coat. Like,
who am I? Yeah.
Who am I? My identity, whatever. But that's often what we do. And that's often what I see in the personal development world when we're trying to make changes and they don't go the way we go. Like, well, I can't even do this. I can't even make this change. So it's a different mindset. And also I think the thing that comes when we experiment, and if any of our lab members watch this, then we'd love to hear your experience of being in the Life Design Lab and really leaning into this idea of experimenting week by week, month on month with the kind of lives we want to create. We'd love to hear what's been your experience leaning more into this idea of experimenting. But I certainly know that, so what we've witnessed, what Kim and I have witnessed, is that some folks go, okay, well, I want to get better sleep at night. Or I want to, I want to start exercising every day. So I'm going to start trying this. Or I want to, actually, that's not even a right one. I just want to feel better.
Mm-hmm.
And then, how do we experiment week on week with what that might look like? And we've had some surprising results where folks have said, well, actually, I didn't think this would be the thing that that's ended up helping me, but it has. Kim.
Yeah, I think there's just so much around experimenting that I'd like to share. And what this brings up for me is the past, right? When we think about our history as human beings and, everything that we've learned and all the books and millions of books that are out there in the world. And I remember reading some quotes from Thomas Edison, and I just would like to share a couple of them because I think how he framed failure is pretty amazing and something that I'm striving for, and I would love to share it with all of you. So here's a couple. I have 3 quotes from him. So Thomas Edison, he invented one of the batteries that's around. So I'm not techie, so it's a battery.
A battery. Wasn't it the light bulb? But anyway, battery.
Yeah. One of them. I mean, he invented lots of stuff, but there's a story that he had to try and figure out the wiring and the whole idea of a battery for 10,000 times. And he was getting kind of picked at by a reporter, and he responded in this way. He's like, I haven't failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work. And he's followed up by saying, I can never find the things that work best until I know the things that don't work. And the last one is really great. He's like, results? Why, man, I've gotten a lot of results. I know several thousand things that won't work. What do you think about that, Morna?
Well, I think that's like dedication.
Yeah, 10,000. Could you imagine 10,000 combination? Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I think that's awesome dedication, and I think it speaks to also a fundamental mindset. And I'm curious. Also, just I guess the distance that I hear when he's talking about the thing that he's working on. The experiment didn't work. It's not that Thomas Edison was a loser and a failure. I mean, one of the greatest genius inventors of all time. But how often do we attach ourselves to whatever the thing is that that we're working on, or give an unrealistic expectation of success? Okay, so I want to exercise I want to feel fitter. So what I'm going to do is commit to exercising every day. Well, I did it 3 days this week and I didn't do it for 2 days this week. So you could actually chalk that up to, well, I failed, but actually you succeeded because you exercised for 3 days, and maybe you learned that that's actually what's realistic for you and what's possible.
Exactly.
So, I think it's interesting because it's definitely one of the core things that informed our membership program, our lab, when we designed it. Both Kim and I have years and years and years of experience of designing training courses, designing the kind of a transformational program. But we actually wanted to create something different here, which really reflects, again, I know that we've talked about this in previous shows, what happens when we create a space for experimentation, what happens when we create a space to tune into our own experience of how we feel and respond and what works for us, instead of everyone else's experience of what works for them. And it's not that that's not valuable. It's hugely valuable to hear other people's experiences, but we have to know what that is for us. And so I feel like, again, the idea of experimenting and getting comfortable with experimenting gives us a gap to be able to look at something and work with it instead of dismissing it as right and wrong. Am I making any sense, Kim? Can you translate this?
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's all good. And I think this is part of what happens in our conversations, what happens when we're in conversations in the lab, is that we're working through these concepts together. We're bouncing ideas off. And what's coming up for me as you're talking is this idea of comfortable. And I think we get uncomfortable with the word failure because, like you said, we attach our worthiness to it. So if we can shift our mindset about, having, and there's this trendy word out there right now, it's called the growth mindset, especially around kids, is, having them feel comfortable in trying and not being good at it at the first time.
Oh, yeah.
And, I always, when I'm beating myself up about, I should have been able to do that perfectly or whatever that even means, the first time, I always think about my kids starting to walk. Like at that 1.5 where they'd like pile their head into the coffee table and they just get up and keep going. They just keep getting up that 10,000 times. And a child would never stand up and start in their head going, I'm such a failure. And there wasn't any of that. I don't think there's any of that inner critic because it hasn't even developed yet. So I always think about that. It's like, toddlers starting to walk. That's exactly what, if we can create that wonder mindset that this is, I'm gathering information, I'm gathering results. And the more results I have, the more discernment I can make, the more wise action, like you say, or wise decisions that we can move forward with. Because without the experimentation, without this lab kind of vibe, would we even try anything?
Well, I think that's a great question. And I want to say hi to Karen, give Karen a shout out who's here. I think there's so much in what you just said, and it's really fascinating, actually, the research around, particularly the research around girls, particularly the research around adolescent girls, that we tend to want to wait until we have something perfect, or we tend to decide that we're not going to try something because we're worried about how we're going to look. Are we going to be able to get it right? And I mean, you can even see this in this plays out in the job market. It's this research is well known that a man will go for a promotion when he doesn't actually have the qualifications or a slim amount of experience, whereas a woman will look at the same job and go, I better go and get an MBA before I apply for this one. And so I really think it's something that is crucial for us to work on as women, to make a generalized statement. I know that
for sure,
not the same for everyone, for sure. And I think just even thinking about the show is one of the ways that Kim and I do it, and Kim's fuzzy right now. We can see it. We're having some technical difficulties with the software that we've chosen for this. And we were just talking about next week, we're going to start experimenting with some different options. But, Kim and I and this may shock some of the viewers who might be listening, haven't gone to broadcasting talk show school to, to figure out how to do this. We're really committed to making a difference in the world, and this is one of the ways that we can do it, just by showing up and having this conversation. And do we think that everything that's coming out of our mouths is some profound, like, whatever? No. It's really just Kim and I chatting and sharing our experience of being swimming in this field of personal development and leadership training for so many years. And so, we know that somebody watching this show might hear something, might hear a little gem, it might trigger something, but we're not carefully curating and scripting 20 minutes of which actually probably won't shock anyone who might have been.
We're just like flying. We're the Wright brothers for like the online show.
Right.
But I think what I'd like to say around that is, we could have said, oh no, we can't go online yet. We don't have a professional intro with music and an announcer. Oh no, because those are all the things that are on our list. But otherwise it might be 2 years from now. You just got to jump in, do it, and gather information, gather results, and keep going. Yeah.
And I love that. And there's one thing that's kind of coming to mind around all of this, and that's energy. And I think sometimes when we start down this path of, life maybe isn't feeling like it should for us, we're getting that feeling that things aren't going the way we want them to, it can actually feel pretty overwhelming to start making change, particularly if we're already kind of stressed, overloaded, and as women facing kind of all of the different multiple demands. The idea of having the energy to even do anything differently can feel overwhelming. And that's another reason why we've structured the kind of the lab and the way we've structured it, is because, what we've said is, instead of asking you to do this enormous program, just come and hang out with us for an hour every week and tune into what's important and the simple changes that you can make. And I think sometimes we make change or growth into this big hoo-ha, this huge thing. And, I've certainly done this. Maybe I have a tendency to do these things around New Year's as well. And I'm making these big, I'm going to do this and that and da. And then I just go and have a nap.
Yeah, right. It's like, wow.
Yeah. Whereas how could it be different if I just experimented with waking up in the morning and spending 10 minutes writing down how I feel? Could that make a huge change in my life? Yes.
Well, are you doing that? Yeah.
So
how long have you been doing that for? So you wake up and you write down.
Year.
Wow. Like, that's amazing. That's amazing. And what have you, like, if that's your experiment, I'm curious. I mean, we have a couple minutes. What have you gained from the results from that experiment of 10 minutes? How do I feel?
Huge. And it's interesting because I'd started off, I have a routine in the morning. I do some mindfulness practice. I do some other things. But sometimes I don't have necessarily the same amount of time for those things, but I always have time for this writing exercise. And sometimes it's just a sentence. But it's actually been one of the most transformational things I've done a long time, because firstly, it gives a release and a voice to whatever I wake up with, whatever I'm waking up to, which might be, anything from, oh, I can't wait for this day, so many exciting things happening. Some days I might wake up anxious. Some days I might wake up with an immediate thought of something that needs to happen. Just so many different ways to wake up in the morning. If I tune into it and write it down, then it's almost like a little sacred space that I've created myself before the noise and demands of the day kick in. And, I'll write down how I'm feeling. And then I also typically kind of have a look at my day and I write down how I want to show up.
I love that.
And it's that intention. It's just huge. So that can be anywhere from a minute to 15 minutes, depending. Kind of no big deal. But here's the thing, actually, here's the bottom line of what I want to say. This is something I know for sure. This is going to be like a Dr. Phil moment. So everyone.
All right, should I write it down?
Yeah, you write it down. Yeah. If you want things to be different, you actually have to do something different.
Yeah, we need to write that down.
Yeah. If you want things to be different, you actually have to do something different. There's no avoiding experimenting with something else. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results, although it sounds like it worked for Thomas Edison, but I think he might have done something slightly different every time.
Different thing. Yes, he tried different things every time. Right. 10,000 ways.
Right. So, why do we cling on to these things that we're doing over and over again and expecting them to, sometimes things are, the nature of things are like that. But if you want things to change, you have to do something different. So it's time to get experimenting.
I have nothing else to say. That was gold.
Mic drop. Mic drop. Okay, ladies, we are reaching the end of our little chat today. As always, I want to extend an invitation to anyone who's been hanging out in our community, who's been joining in and with our live show and hanging out in our other spaces. You're probably aware that we do run a life design lab for women leaders. We meet weekly for an hour. It's our paid membership program. Right now, it's kind of a ridiculous deal to be a member of the program. And it's not going to stay that way. So we've got a small inner circle group of women in that program right now from different countries around the world. It's a really phenomenal group of women. And we're going to be opening the program up later on in the year at a much bigger scale in a different way. So really the next kind of month or two is your opportunity to come and be a part of this smaller inner circle and hang out with Kim and I for a week, for an hour every week, and the other women in the lab. And what we do is we have what's called a green go sheet. I'm just going to talk about the lab for 2 minutes before we sign.
Yeah, go ahead. I love it.
We've got this thing called a green go sheet, and which really asks some questions, some really simple but incredibly powerful questions. What time is it in your world? How do you want to show up? What's important to you now? And what are your big rocks? Like, what are the things that you want to pay attention to? And then each month we invite the women in the lab to tune into something that they want to focus on and run an experiment around it. And then we coach week on week around how to make tweaks and what's working and what's not. And then at the end of the month, we have a celebration call, and that's actually the call that we're leaning into this afternoon. And today, I can't wait. Everyone has awesome. A love seat moment, and we give some love to each other. And so I think actually during June we're going to be sharing with you. And in fact, I think we should bring some of the lab members on to this Instagram and talk about it. That. And
how about before we go, what are we doing next week, Morna?
What are we doing next week? Wow, we're going to
have different backgrounds next week.
We're going to have different backgrounds. So next week we're going to be broadcasting live from downtown Vancouver from Women Deliver 2019, which is the biggest global gathering for women's rights and equality in the world. There'll be 7,000 other female change makers from around the world working on the most incredible change making and really working towards creating a world that works for women and children and for everyone in the process, because that's what women do, right? That's what we do. So we're going to be broadcasting live. We're going to hopefully actually do some live broadcasts every day, but we're going to be running the show live from Women Deliver next week. Who knows what will happen? Who knows who will be there? It'll be amazing. So tune in next week live from Women Deliver. And if you want to know more about the Life Design Lab for Women Leaders, then you can send either Kim or I a private message on Facebook, and we'll let you know how to hang out with us.
Yay! Okay. Oh, so much fun. Bye. Where was the mic drop?
Mic drop. Oh, what's the mic drop? If you want something to change, you've got to do something different. That's the. I'll drop my hairbrush.
Oh, that's awesome.
Bye, everyone. See you next week.